So it's 3 o'clock. I hope your tea mugs are refreshed, you've had a little stretch and a little wriggle in your seat, and you're all set for another stonker of a session. Brilliant start and a fantastic middle to the UHMLG sandwich that is our sessions this afternoon. I'm really pleased to have Hossam and Inga join us from Open University, long a source of innovation in online teaching and online support, and obviously a huge advocate for accessibility. I'm really pleased to have them join us. What I forgot to mention right at the very start is that tweet please on hashtag UHMLG22. So do please tweet along as well as the session. We're going to be evaluating as well as at the end of the session as well. So look out for the email, which gives you a chance to send in an evaluation of all of the events and give us ideas for things that you'd like to have in future sessions. So without any further ado, Hossam and Inga, tell us all about accessibility at the Open University, please. Thank you so much.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Hossam Kassem, and I'm joined here by my colleague Inga Jones, who both of us are academic liaison librarian or teaching and learning librarians at the Open University, and both of us have accessibility hats in addition to our roles. I've been with the Open University since 2018, and Inga joined us late last year, if I'm not mistaken. So we've had some experience moving from Brick University to a completely online education institutes. So hopefully today we'll be talking about how the library deal with accessibility with the students when we're teaching online, and how we work with course designers to make sure that their resources are accessible. So during this session, hopefully we'll cover how we deliver effective library teaching online, how we support students with library content, how we work with module teams or what we call course teams during the designing stage of our courses. I'll talk more about how our courses are delivered later on, and then how we work also with publishers in order to make sure that resources we purchase or subscribe to are accessible. And part of this session, we are hoping that you will also share your experiences with us. We're happy to answer questions, but also would like to know how you also deal with these things, because we've been dealing with it in a certain way. We'd like to see how others dealt with it over the past 2 years, because we would like to learn from you as well. Just a bit of background from the Open University perspective. Probably, if you don't know that, the Open University has a mission that it's open to all. You might not have even A levels or GCSE, and we still welcome those students at the university. And the Open University is looked at as if like it could be the home of the disabled students in the UK, and the numbers does reflect that. So the February numbers for disabled students at the university is 33,000 unique, just over 33,000 unique individual students. And that's represent about 22.2% of our student population. The numbers is already out of date. They are already out of date because the new numbers are 35,000 plus. And it's 23%, just over 23% of our student population. And from the graph you see here, or the pie chart you see here, that the range of disabilities we have. And lots of our students have multiple disabilities. So they could be having hearing impaired, sight impaired plus mobility issues, or they could be mental health issues. And that's our largest populations. 20,000 of our students have declared that they have mental health problems. And these figures are just for those who agreed to tell us that they have disability. There might be many more who decided not to tell us this information for one reason or another. We try to help as many people as possible, but it just gives you an idea of the range of disabilities we have here. And sight and hearing is the smallest numbers we have at the Open University. There are other disabilities that are mobility issues, learning difficulties, and mental health are our biggest. I'm going to pass you to Inga here.
All right. I'm going to be talking to you about accessibility and how we use it for training sessions and other ways that we support the students in that area. As Hossam says, given the numbers of the university and the proportion of students who require accessible content, we do our best to make our sessions accessible to all. When designing a session in general and for online training in particular, the following questions are absolutely crucial and underpin our work. How can you make sure that everyone will benefit from the session? And by everyone, we do usually start out thinking about everyone. So think about those who have a hearing, visual, or any other disability. We know that there are many hidden disabilities that may require a slightly different background to your slides than you would normally use, or a slightly different font that is more accessible. So think about accessibility also from the point of view of those who are unable to attend because they have a busy life and they study at the Open University for a reason, so that they can fit it around their life, their work, their caring responsibilities. So they might be pressed for time. The other question that we also always have to consider is what time of day or day of the week would suit your students best. And again, here we're trying to catch the majority of our students to give them the opportunity to attend our sessions. So here, quantitative and qualitative data that you gather from evaluations and questionnaires can really help you to address these questions and plan for far more accessible sessions than you would be able to do otherwise. Consider also whether you might have someone who has a disability in your training session. So looking at the students who are going to be attending and their needs is important here. What can you do for them? Will you need to provide a transcript? Will you need to record the session and make it available? Most of our sessions for modules are generally recorded and then are made available in the forums, for example. Will this recording need a transcript and subtitles as well? Will your session need it in real life? Do get in touch with attendees and provide as much support in advance as possible, including your accessible slides and handouts. And I will talk a little bit more about that later on. Is your session accessible for those students? So think about what it is that you're trying to cover and how you're going to go about it. So you're thinking here carefully about any potential pitfalls and stumbling blocks that might trip you up within the session. So there's a host of useful material that is provided by accessibility leaders such as DICU, University, AbilityNet, and WebAIM. And if you're presenting using generic Microsoft toolkit, Microsoft has quite useful embedded functions that allow you to create more accessible content. Next slide, please. Things you need to consider when you begin the design process. First of all, headings. The use of headings is really important. As Hossam says, I'm fairly new to the accessibility area. So when I started, one of the first things I did was a WebAIM course. And that really was quite eye-opening, because for someone who has worked in education in the last, well, always, I had not realized until I did that course how inaccessible the material that I had produced previously actually was. And I have taught in a school that was heavy with learning support and students with all kinds of disabilities. So that came quite a bit as quite a bit of a shock for me. And then again, the use of color, font and background. Those are really important issues when you're trying to make things accessible for everyone. The size of the text as well. If you have someone who is partially sighted, the bigger the font, the better for them. So we try at the Open University to conform to at least WCAG level AA. There is AAA, but we aim to conform to the AA to make our material that bit more accessible. Things like images, tables, graphs, and charts. Extra attention needs to be paid to alternate text that you're providing, and knowing how to provide the most sensible text that is being displayed is also a skill that you kind of develop as you go along. a lot of us use images for purely decorative purposes. This is something that you, when you're trying to make material accessible, really need to think about. What purpose does the image serve, and how are you going to present it in the alternative text? Is it going to interfere with the overall message of the slide? If yes, disband that, and so on. Tables can be quite tricky. Charts are usually okay because you can provide alternative text that is quite descriptive and allows students to understand what is going on. Do you need fancy slides? Again, Microsoft will help you on that front. They will point out any elements that aren't accessible. Do you really need to use a format that might be very appealing to the eye but will not be accessible? What elements could be problematic? And would providing a script be useful? If you are trying to make sure that your slides are fully accessible, then the answer is yes. So a really important tip is, and I have mentioned it before already, PowerPoint and all Microsoft applications have an accessibility check. So when you are in the app, you go to review and then check accessibility. This will check the menu, will do the automated checks. You do need to do manual checks as well. And for that, I would certainly thoroughly recommend the WebAIM course if you have funding for training on that front. Next slide, please. Things to consider at the presentation stage. There are several factors that you need to take into account when you're presenting. If you know that a disabled student is joining the session, ask them what they need. It might be scripts and slides in advance, maybe adjusting your speed, adjusting your font. Again, thinking about the images that you're going to be using. Will you need to make them bigger? Will the alternative text need to be adjusted to make it clear? During the presentation, make sure to speak clearly and regularly check if attendees can hear you. That's something that I haven't done. I'm assuming you can hear me. Tell attendees what you're doing in detail. If presenting digitally, especially make sure your pointer mouse is on an accessible setting and is clearly visible to all. We usually tend to use large and dark or bright color. A colleague of mine, for example, uses neon green because it's going to be visible against most slides, so that those with some visual impairment can actually see what it is that you're doing on screen if you're pointing things out. Next slide, please. Providing subtitles and transcripts for our generic sessions is one of the ways in which we ensure that our training sessions are as accessible as possible. There are YouTube video examples from the OU library that you can have a look at, but as you can see on the image is fairly small, but the black box in the middle of the bottom of the screen is the subtitle, the transcript that is going on at the same time in the system that we use to present our live engagement sessions. With a more frequent use of recorded sessions and audiovisual teaching materials, especially audio description is becoming increasingly important. That is not something we're going to be able to cover because it's something that we are currently also discussing at length with our live engagement department. However, websites such as JISC, AbilityNet, DICU, etc., they all offer extensive information on both transcripts and audio description and any new developments in the area. It's always worth signing up to any updates on any new developments with them. Next slide, please. Accessibility top tips from us would be, and I will repeat some of what I have already said. Make your slides, your session that you're presenting as accessible as possible from the outset. And that is because it's much easier to do that than retrospectively going back and trying to fix things. Use Microsoft Office Check Accessibility feature. Microsoft and Apple, as well as WebAIM, that covers actually both systems, provide ample guidance on how to ensure accessibility of your documents. There is a lot to learn there, so it's something that you accumulate over time. I have done the whole course, it was very intensive, but I would have to go back to my materials to consult as and when I need certain elements. For example, tables are a really, really important element because they are so tricky to do. Other items are fairly straightforward, something like color contrast. As long as you follow the WCAG specifications, you should be okay on that front. And that's something that Microsoft and Apple do check automatically to a degree. Make slide script available ahead of the session. And this is really useful because many students with invisible disabilities in particular would benefit from reading ahead. And that is something that really struck me when I started working in the OU, because if you get something to look at in advance, you are mentally prepared. So if that is at all a possibility, do that. If you know in advance that one of your students is disabled, ask them for their format preferences. And something that came up just today in a conversation is, for example, supporting a deaf student who's attending a session like that. So you need somehow the content to be presented in sign language. And I think Hossam might know a little bit more about how that would work, but we can discuss it in the questions later. For recordings, we offer transcript and subtitles and ensure that these are also in accessible format. And most of all, when presenting, speak clearly and not at a mad speed. Right, next slide, please. In addition to everything that I have covered so far, the library obviously offers a lot more support to disabled students beyond teaching sessions and presenting. So one of the areas, for example, that we cover are the SIZE library volunteers. So students in secure environments have limited access to the internet. So they're restricted in many ways, so they fall within our remit. So the library coordinates assistance to students in secure environments through supporting them by providing library study volunteers. In February this year, the library SIZE volunteers have reached their 300th inquiry. So that was quite a milestone for us. So these volunteers will use the library materials, the library catalog, and the resources we provide based on the requirements that the students have given them. And if they're stuck, they come to us. So this service is tied to our help desk service. We also conduct a supported literature search. So students who have difficulty searching the library databases for whatever reason can request help with finding references for assignments, including journal, newspaper articles, statistics, and company information. Where we subscribe to the full text online, we are able to forward it in a suitable format. And that involves looking at the information they provided us with, consulting the module page, looking at the TMA requirements, for example, and then trying to select what we would in their position as the best material for them to use. Another tool that we use, and that is really, really useful for students, and that is something that can be used on the slides if you are allowing students sight of them before the training session, is the census and access tool. This is one of the easiest ways to convert resources to a format that works for the needs of the students. It is an automated conversion service that converts material into a range of formats. Students can select whether they want it, for example, as an audio file, as a PDF file or any other format that is available. There is quite a range there. And yeah, so the student will go into the census tool, will upload their material, and then it will be available to download for them. So this can be useful when offering students material ahead of the session, for example, or if they're consulting, if their preferred method, for example, is listening to audio files. When they find material on our websites, they can put articles in chunks or in whole through the system to then listen to it, for example. So in addition to all of this, we have many other services available from the library and across the UU to our students. And our help desk, for example, is there 24/7 to give any support. And we provide it in many cases as one-to-one on the phone or via email to help the student to get most of our work.
Okay, thanks, Inga. I'm going to continue from here. So Inga talked about how we support students during our online training sessions, but another element of our work as academic liaison librarians within the Open University is supporting module or course teams who work on course production. Just a bit of background, our courses, our VLE or virtual learning environments is the actual books where the students go and read. So it's actually written like a book. The students will go through the pages one by one and read it. So the production cycle could last anything between 12 to 24 months and involve academics, librarians, editors, web editors, digital media editors. So there's a huge production team working on that for about 12 to 24 months to produce the final product, which would live for about 5 to 10 years online with minor updates here and there, depending on the type of information. So technology modules will be updated probably regularly every 2 years, go through media midlife cycle or midlife review to make sure that it's still up to date. So the academic liaison librarians will be sitting on the production cycle and advising module teams about library contents that they can use in the library. Also, one of the things we do is database accessibility testing to ensure that anything used on the module will be accessible, and also materials used will be tested and converted on demand. So I'm going to talk about this in more details. So as I said, the production cycle lasts for about 12 to 24 months. During this period, we sit on the module cycle productions, and module teams will tell us what they are going to use from the library. We try to get them to use as many resources as possible from the library because our agreements allow us to embed things in the module. We have built a relation with publishers to allow us to talk to them and get accessible materials if necessary. So when module teams select articles or select book chapters to use on the module, these are put through for testing. And more detail, I'll talk more about what we test there. And we test them and make sure if they are accessible, great, fine. We don't need to do anything. We just put links to these materials or ask the students to find this information themselves and read it. The reason we ask them to find it is because we want them to learn these skills themselves. Sometimes if there is no time to do that, they are given direct links to these materials. And it's fine if they read it. If they are not accessible, they go through a process for testing. We identify them, and then we'll deal with them at a later stage. Another thing we do, some of the module teams is, again, part of sitting on a module production, we try to embed digital information literacy skills in modules. So instead of asking giving the students links to things, we would like them to search for it. It's part of their employability skills, part of their information literacy. So if the module team choose to use a database, let's say if you are consider that we are medical libraries, if you are going to use Ovid, Medline Ovid, we run this through the accessibility testing. And if it's accessible, great, we don't need to do anything. And when we say accessible, I'm going to talk about more what we test exactly. but we don't need to do anything if it's accessible. If it's not accessible, then we will have a chat with the publishers, as I will talk later. So what do we test in terms of materials that are going to be embedded in modules or in courses? So we test the articles and book chapters for screen reader users. If it can be read by a screen reader, great. We don't need to do anything. If it's not, we will highlight it and we leave it aside. We mark it that if a disabled student wants, or if a screen reader user needs it, we will convert it for them. Ideally, we'd like them to convert it via census access, but census access is an automated service and it can return results within 10-15 minutes. But sometimes the outcome is heavily dependent on the original source. So if the original source is a scanned image of an archived paper, you could imagine what's going to come out, nothing probably. But if it's just a badly formatted Word document or a PDF file, it will get better results. If that rule doesn't work, then we will convert it for them on request. Because we've identified it, we can then give it to another team within the Open University who will convert it into a Word document, an accessible Word document, and then only students with that code, with a specific code, we allocate them disability codes that will allow them to see these documents if they are eligible for it. So in order to comply with the law, we need to make sure that only those who are eligible for it can see it. Once you convert it once, it can live on the module in a special section that can only be visible to us librarians and to the relevant students. And then they can dip in and out of it. And again, because our modules live for 5 to 10 years online, once you've done it once, it lives there until the module is recycled or rewritten again, so they might change materials. That's on the side of the article and book chapters. Now, the databases go through a different process. So if a module team is going to use a database, let's say Ovid Medline, we will run it through different type of tests, and how deep the depth of the test is relevant. It's dependent on the number of users are going to use it in the university, or how important the resource. If it's going to be used across the whole university, it goes through something called an audit, which is about 16 hours worth of testing. If it's only a small proportion of students are going to use it, we run it through what we call a basic test. It's a misname, but it's 8 hours test. But the majority of the databases will go through something called 4 steps database testing. It can be done in about 4 hours. And that is an achievement. We managed to reduce it and still get good results. So what we test is we test that the database can be used by keyboard-only users. So you need to be able to tab through all the elements part of the database, the basic search, the advanced search, the result page, the item records page where you can see who's the author, who's the publisher, and so on. And then can they actually open the full text and read it if it's a book, or if it's a video, does it have subtitles, does it have transcripts, and so on. So we test all these elements and make sure that if it's fine, again, great, we don't need to do anything. Sometimes the database itself is accessible, but the final elements or the final the materials they need to read, that the articles are not accessible, then we will highlight that to the module team, and we think about alternatives. Because we have to write everything in advance, we need to think about alternatives again in advance. So if the database is not accessible, or the results that the students want to get to are not accessible, what we are going to do about it. So all that is thought about very early in the production cycle, because again, we don't know who is going to come onto the module. We can't afford going back and rewrite things because we had one student that can't access the material. So everything has to be designed in advance. Another thing we check is it screen reader user? Again, can a screen reader only user go through the entire database? Color and text size is essential. Again, can you enlarge it? Can you change the background color? Because some people don't like the white background. Some people don't like the font use. So can they play with it? And another thing is once everything is done, the relevant library, the person who did the testing will speak to the librarian who asked for the test about the results and alternative options, and then the librarian will hold discussion with the module team. At the same time, the accessibility librarian we'll talk to our e-content team to see what can we do with the publishers, and I'm going to talk about that more. Another thing we do is put accessibility tips for students. So if we found some accessibility issues, we will highlight these issues to the students, and if there are workarounds, we will tell them what they are until the publisher do a fix. So how we talk with the publishers. Our e-content team, or what we call the ECA team, have developed over many years, developed a really good relation with the publishers. So we don't say no to a database that is not accessible. We kind of try to have a carrot and stick option. So we will test it. If we are going to get through a trial, we will test that database and see if there's any issues. And then during the negotiations or renewals, we will raise accessibility with them and talk to them about it all the time. You get mixed response. However, since 2018 and introduction of the website accessibility statements, we found that the publishers have become more willing to talk about accessibility, and actually some of them do physically come and say, can you help us with this? So when we talk with them, we found a good way is not just to give them the report we have produced, because it may mean nothing to them. We actually sit with them and with their developers, if they are willing to, and we show them what's the issues. And they will, and I'm going to make the Oxford University Press, the Journal of Video Experiments, and the Cite Them Right people were really collaborating with us, because they realized the issue. They didn't realize that the problems, because some of the problems might be very, very small, like the database itself is accessible, but then they do a minor change, such as introducing the social media buttons, and then the whole thing goes into becoming inaccessible because you get into a loop that you can't go beyond the buttons. And they would work with us on these fixes, and any fix we do in the they fix with us, it's fixed worldwide. So that's another advantage. Again, as I said, the accessibility is considered during the negotiation, and as I said, they are willing to talk. So but saying no to them from the start for us is a wrong thing, because we find that talking is the best thing to do, and showing them the problem, how the students would suffer as a result of something being inaccessible, is important. And recently we have produced a piece of research with disabled students that was not, the aim of it was not to name and shame anyone, but just talk about the difficulties they face when they are going through even the Open University websites. And it was an eye-opener, because none of the majority, the students who were willing to talk to us were not the usual visually impaired or hearing impaired. They were autistic and had other learning difficulties. And the things they talked about were very simple, but very important at the same time. You wouldn't think about. We talk about, like, we'd like the website to be fancy and colorful, but some of these things can be more of a distraction. One of the students described like having a blue screen and everything on the screen is blue, like you are searching for a blue fish in the sea. You can't see it. And when we watched the video, it was an eye-opener for us, because we made stories of these to share with publishers. Now we finished talking about what we do in the library, and we're happy to answer questions, but also would like to hear your experiences. So we're going to open it now to questions, and I've seen some coming through the chat, and I'm happy to answer them. And Inga as well.
So I'm going to hold my simmering outrage in abeyance for just a moment or two. There's a few comments around CC, the fact that you're dealing with students in a secure environment who don't have access to the internet. That's a whole different layer of challenge, which most of us wouldn't. Sometimes our internet fails, but you've got people who are starting from a completely different point. There was a recognition, and suddenly I could see light bulbs going off all over the place in relation to the cursor color, and oh, so simple. What is such a good suggestion. So thank you for those right from the very start. One particular question, or a starter question from Katie: have you ever come across a conflict between making something accessible and making something attractive or comfortable for users without accessibility requirements? It shouldn't feel like just because it's accessible, it's either ugly or plain.
Yes, I mean, you can use colors if you want, but just make sure that there is enough color contrast. For example, sometimes having moving images on the screen is problematic. So when you have like these windows coming over the other, this is problematic for screen readers. So it might cause a conflict, but accessibility doesn't mean ugliness. You can produce something that is really accessible and at the same time really attractive. It's part of being usable. And when we think about usability, it has to be for everyone.
Yeah, sure.
There is no conflict, but and you have to think about alternatives. Sometimes you might want to use a really good some of the activities, for example, might involve drag and drop, and lots of students like a drag and drop, but it's not good for someone who can't use a mouse, or someone who's a screen reader user. But you need to think about alternative. So at the same time, we would like to use these, and we don't stop using them, but we think about how we can give exactly the same learning outcomes, but with using something else. So you would have to design the activity in an alternative format. And that's the same thing applied to students in prison. You have to think these will receive paper documents. So the whole module will be printed for them and sent to them. How can you give them the same experience? There are stuff which Inga talked about that you can't make. So they can't do database research. But what we expect from them when they communicate with the volunteers is that they give us the search terms they want us to use.
You can develop the strategy. That's an intellectual process. The button pressing is less of it. Interesting, really interesting. There was a bit of a to and fro. Slides ahead of the session. There's given the script and given there's something ahead of the session so that people can read and prepare. I mean, good for non-native English speakers as well. Sometimes as much as for people when you're trying to make it accessible. There was a question about whether that impacts on attendance, and somebody gave the experience of, yeah, I've had people not turn up because I gave them material ahead of time, and then Steve says most academic studies have found that supplying presentations in advance doesn't affect attendance. So a personal experience versus academic studies evidence. So your thoughts around that, impacting attendance if you give too much ahead of time.
Inga, have you been involved in the live engagement team? I have been, but I just want to.
No. A little bit, but I think what emerges for us is those students in the sessions where the slides have not been made available, for example, they will keep asking throughout the sessions, can we have the slides? Do you have the slides? When will the slides become available? So I think who was it? Someone made a point that it doesn't impact attendance, and I think for academic sessions will be different to what we offer. We offer actual, tangible, hands-on support, really, when we teach them skills, and that's very different from attending a lecture. So it's in the students' interest to attend that session on referencing or on bibliography, because it is very important to get it right, and they worry about that. So I think that might impact the attendance rate.
Yeah.
And the other thing you could, I mean, if you are worried about attendance, at least give them the option, or make it known that if you want the slides in advance for whatever reason, contact the librarian and we will make it available like 24 or 48 hours before the session. So you give it to them, because some of the disabled users, like either dyslexic or screen reader, might want to go through these slides ahead of the session. Just to make sure that they are familiar, because remember, if someone is a screen reader user and listening to it online, they're going to have two voices in their head, your voice and the screen reader voice at the same time.
Yeah.
So if they go through the slides in advance, they know what it is, and probably they may decide then to switch the screen reader off and just listen to you. Give them that option. It wouldn't hurt. I mean, for us, our generic sessions that is available to everyone, we have the link to the slides on the website in the same place where they joined the room, and our attendance never went down. Actually, it's been increasing every year. And anyone who's not going to attend is not going to attend anyway.
I think there's a great deal of truth in that. I remember was there something on a Radio 4 program, you and yours, where somebody played the screen reader voice as it moved across a website. It's horrendous. It's just horrendous. If the site is bad, it just sounded dreadful. I thought that was a real.
I use it for testing as well, and it is irritating. And I mean, you have, and especially it is irritating to listen to, and sometimes you can't play around with the voice and change it. But imagine you're hearing this voice, and then again, the website you are using is not accessible, or the slides you are reading are not, you're adding to the extra difficulty. So it's just, there is things you can do to minimize this effect on the students and not exclude them. Again, our aim is to be as inclusive as possible. There is sometimes things that you can't do. I mean, you can't have with certain online rooms, you can't have the subtitles ready. You have to do it something after the event. But if you can't do that, at least make their life easier by sharing transcripts like we have in the Open University transcript that are the librarians using the delivery of the session. So we happily share these with our disabled students. It's just trying to do as much as possible to reduce their problems.
Yeah, I can anticipate my problem would be sticking to the script. So it doesn't veer. I'm terrible at sticking to scripts, however, that's my problem to overcome in terms of that sort of approach. There's a point was raised about accents and automated subtitles, and being a person with a particular accent, often the automatic subtitles do not pick up the subtleties of my accent. Are there ways that you have identified that can help with that?
I'm not a British native, and I have clearly an accent. I try to slow down as much as possible when I speak. Sometimes we don't turn on the videos when we are delivering our online session because the student bandwidth might be bad. Yes, my bandwidth might be good, but theirs might be bad, so it affects. But try to speak, enunciate as much as possible. Accents, everyone have an accent, so of sort, and international students may not understand certain accents. But you try your best. We send our stuff to a company that does the transcript for us, and then we go through it to make sure that if there is any errors that they are fixed. And sometimes even one of the errors was like the transcriber misheard something and written it in the wrong way, and we had to fix it. But Inga mentioned something about like what if you have deaf students in the session. If we know in advance, again, the students have to tell us in advance if they have certain requirements. And the Open University did provide for one student in one of the sessions, someone to listen to the presenter and type at the same time so the student could read what is being said. And again, you provide the subtitles later to help them. But there is lots of ways you could do. Again, providing the if you can't get this, give them the transcript in advance or the slide in advance to help them.
Yeah, thank you. So now we have a little space to move on to the accessibility of databases and my simmering outrage that you as an institution spend 16 hours on a commonly used and a popularly needed required database, 16 hours to check whether it's accessible, and then one small tweak makes it suddenly inaccessible, and what to do if a database that's commonly used fails that 16-hour test, and how can other institutions hope to replicate that contribution to making it accessible, and why don't the publishers fix it and sort it and consider that from the very start? Rant over, please. It's a really interesting point, and not one that I think I'd considered. I thought about PowerPoint slides, but not the databases themselves, and I think the points that you raise and the contribution that you make to making them accessible is fantastic. So thank you for that.
The 16 hours is, we decided to move away from that and only limit it to where something that is going to be used across the entire institution, and Cite Them Right website is one of them. Nexus UK, the news website, is another one, because we know there will be like all the students using it in one way or another. So we will take these through an audit. But we moved to more the 4 steps testing, and still that's 4 hours of the library assistant time. Again, the audit has to be done by a librarian. Imagine in the past there was one librarian doing that across 500 databases, and we kind of like painting the
fourth bridge. Yes.
Except that they found a new paint that you no longer need to do it, while with the databases you have to keep doing it. But we moved away from this into putting criteria. So it has to be like either new subscription or a trial. If we know that there is a new platform, or if it's going to be used on a module or in a library activity, we will test these and we will share it with the publishers. Again, in the past, there was resistance from the publishers to work with us. there was nothing to force them to do it, and they didn't look at that. But now with the public sector being forced into making sure that their websites are accessible and they provide accessibility statements, I think there is a recognition from the publishers that, hold on, if it started with the public sector, it's going to come slowly to us. So let's start working on it from now. And we've seen difference in behavior. Some of the publishers were willing from the start to work with us, but while others now just started moving. And it's just having talk about, there are some simple stuff that you can do and spot if a database, when you are negotiating if the database is accessible or not, like color contrast, or can I tap into these different places without having to use a mouse? And you could just say, oh, by the way, I couldn't do that. Are you willing to fix it? We rely on their accessibility statements, and we found they might be helpful, but they might not as well, because they don't contain any information that, okay, you're telling me you have this problem. How are you going to fix it? Is there a workaround until I use it? But again, an important bit is not to say no to something, because, for example, I'm going to mention, especially that we have medical librarians here, Anatomy TV is bad for keyboard users only. It's bad for blind users, but it's brilliant for dyslexic users. Mm-hmm. And again, one of the things we recognize at the Open University, we have nursing students. Well, you are not likely to have a blind nurse, but you are very likely to have a dyslexic nurse. So that resource is important to them. Color blindness would come into it here, but you could probably work around things. But that resource is and again, as I mentioned, I think there was the question about usability and accessibility. Yeah, some of the stuff will never be accessible. We have accepted this fact. Scanned images of archived documents, these are never going to be accessible, but we have to use them, but we will convert them on demand when the students wants them. But the database itself, I would expect to be able to reach to the document I want. I should be able to go through it.
Marshall makes a really good point that the providers should be paying you a fee for the hours that are spent in terms of the accessibility checking. But Keith also raises the fact that online resources have to conform to accessibility regulations. So surely there's going to have to be some serious amount of work by them.
Yeah.
You mentioned JISC is involved as well.
Well, JISC, we try to get other people involved, and JISC is a key player in this area. And I think they had an accessibility team that left, and now they put new people. For the past 2 years, there was new people came in, and we'd like to work with them, because no matter what you do, we can't do everything on our own. We may be very lucky to have several people, unlike other universities, working on this, but these several people are, I mean, I'm on 20% of my time, probably 10 of Inga's time, and here and there other people are working on accessibility, but we have other things to do, and we can't do everything ourselves. And also, as you said, in the regulation make public bodies, if we are paying for subscription, we are financiers of these publishers. As such, we are responsible for the fact that their product is not accessible. That's why we talk to them. It's obviously we can't do anything if they don't fix it. That's why you're using disproportionate burden. But we want to make sure we don't do it because the law makes us do it. We do it because we owe a duty to our students. Forget about the law, because we've done it way before the law came in. We've done it since 2008. But again, the law, we kind of now using the law to help us to talk to the publishers. And again, they are willing. It's by talking to them and raising these issues with them, they are willing to talk to us. And sometimes I attend even before I test something, and they ask me to, the EContent team asked me to come and sit with them in a negotiation. And while someone is going through their product and how nice it is, and you start spelling, hold on, what did you do about their accessibility? I can see this is not problematic. And then they stop. Oh, we haven't thought about it. Let's go back to the table, redrawing table, and we'll come back to you again. And that happened with us with 2 or 3 publishers where they were, okay, we're going to work on that and come back to you.
That's admirable, and I'm thankful for that work that you do, because we all benefit. Every time you have that conversation and raise it, we benefit. There's one final question, and so thank you. I mean, my goodness, thank you. Can you suggest a collection of good resources for students with dyslexia? I mean, that comes up a lot, and that's a specific question.
I could, nothing that comes from off the top of my head, but one of the places I could direct you for accessibility in general, the Kent University have a productivity tool that is not only for accessibility. I think it's called Kent Productivity Tool.
Productivity.
Kent Productivity Tool. It has lots of resources about everything, including academic writing, but there's a special section where there is advice on accessibility, but off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you which resource is good for dyslexia or not.
The only one I'm aware of is Brown's ebooks, because they supply schools, and this is something that is quite funny, because schools have actually had a lot of effect on some of the database providers, because schools have such a large proportion of students with dyslexia, etc., that they won't subscribe for something if it's not suitable.
Interesting.
That's come to mind also, the RNIB Bookshare. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Excellent point.
It's RNIB Bookshare. Allow students who have print disability, and dyslexia is one of them, access to all the resources and accessible version of books that they can, even if a book that is not available in accessible format, the students can ask for it. And then RNIB will contact the publisher to see if they can get the accessible file. So that's really good resource for students.
That is really helpful.
Someone asked if this is for students only, RNIB Bookshare. We had experiences where we had researchers in the university who needed that because they have a print disability, and RNIB was happy for us to give them access as long as they work at the university. So it's possible to have it for staff as well.
Yeah, making stuff materials accessible to staff is becoming also increasingly important, and it certainly has become a bigger topic for us to make our material that we publish equally accessible.
If the academic who is keeping the stuff can't access the material because then they're never going to get to use it in the
little name change as well.
Yes. Can I just ask mute to go back on, please? Thank you. Yeah, if the academic has challenges, then they're never going to use the resource in their teaching, and therefore the students aren't going to be able to use it themselves either. So it all comes in a one-er. What fascinating. Fascinating. Thank you so much indeed for that talk, Hossam.
I've just put a link to a feedback form. I've just put a link to a feedback form. We'd appreciate your feedback because, again, your experience, we'll look at it and see if we can improve and how we can improve things also at our end. It would be great if we can have it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, so the links in the feedback there, and of course we'll share any feedback that we get through our evaluation form for the session as general with you. So I'm sure you'll be asking different questions, but we'll certainly share our questions back with you as well. Thank you so much. Really illuminating, really makes us think and try and step into the shoes of somebody who's finding access to something that we find normal, just that little bit more difficult. So very, very many thanks. Thank you so much for your time.